G'day and welcome to another episode of Built by Dan and yet another installment in the GT40 kit build series. In today's episode, I'm going to be tackling a job that I've been putting off for some time now, and that is the installation of the roll bar. Before I get stuck into this episode, just point out that I have finally taken on board that advice from a number of you from my garage makeover video. I have installed a number of additional lights and wow, does it make a difference in here. So hopefully going forward, I will have some clearer footage for future episodes. I've also gone and purchased a drill press. So I spent some time putting that together. It's come in really handy for some of the prep work that I've been doing for this roll bar assembly. So let's jump into what's involved in assembling the roll bar on this GT40 kit car. You probably noticed that I've had the roll bar clamped on here for quite a few episodes now, and that's because I've sort of mocked it up to see how it goes together, but I've been putting off actually doing the work. Firstly, is because of this piece. So this was supplied as 20mm bar stock and it needed to be shaved down. You can see we've been grinding it down to about, I think 17.5 or 18mm in order for it to fit into here. That was a nightmare in itself. I kept seeming to burning through batteries on my battery powered grinder. And then a mate of mine suggested applying some candle wax either onto the piece or onto the sanding disc on the grinder, and it made a world of difference. I managed to clear the same amount of material that took me days in a matter of minutes. So if you are grinding or trying to sand down a large block of aluminium, highly recommend using a bit of candle wax to help it out. So moving on, we obviously have the rear stays here. So they will bolt on there and connect to those tie rod ends or the rod ends up there on the roll bar. There's then a shear plate that mounts on the inside of the sill underneath, and you bolt through both of them to install that rear stay. So what I've done to prepare on this side is drill out the holes in that top aluminium tube of the chassis to match those in the roll bar. I just used a 10mm drill bit, it was suitable, or the same size as what was in the roll bar. I then inserted this block of aluminium to where it needed to go, and using that same 10mm drill bit, I just made a start on the hole so I could transfer those locations through to this block. I didn't want to go all the way through with the 10mm bit because I actually had to tap 3 8-inch threads into them, so I needed to downsize to an 8mm piece. I'll show you what that looked like over here. So on this side, I haven't actually gone through and drilled them out, but you can see just where I drilled through enough just to give me a starting point, and then I can place that into my drill press, get the drill bit centered within that little divot that I've created, and know that I'm pretty well centered in line with the hole in the roll bar bracket. So that's sort of where it's all at. I have had to use a bunch of packers. Some of them were just sitting in the back here because the block isn't quite the full width there, so I obviously want that to sit forward so that it can drill. I can drill through and screw those bolts in later. This one's got a little bit of play up and down as well. I might just try and throw these packers in when I go to install it for the final time. But for now, I think I can sort of play around with it enough to get it to sit where I need it to. So I think what I'm going to do next is grab the block that I just left over there and take it across to the drill press and drill out those holes. So like I said earlier, I'll be drilling an 8mm hole, and then I'll be tapping a 3/8" thread into those. So I've got my aluminium block set up here, and this is what I was referring to earlier. Having this little divot just allows me to make sure that my drill bit is centered right where it needs to be. I can drill a nice straight centered hole. And in terms of, I suppose, the setup that I have here, I'm obviously a bit of a novice at this sort of stuff, so I have a drill speed chart. Gives me the different materials, different size drill bits that I might be using, and the appropriate speed to set the drill at. And then on the other side, I have all my tapping charts, so I know what size hole I need to drill for the particular thread that I need to create. So I've transferred my block of aluminium from my drill press over to my vise. I'm just going to deburr the edges, or sort of chamfer the edges. Before I start tapping the thread. Now I am still tapping all my threads by hand. It's just what I feel comfortable doing. I feel like I've got more control and I can feel what's actually happening. I find it clogs up quite a bit. I don't know why it's so different. Maybe it's just because it's a thicker piece that I'm threading. I haven't really threaded anything this thick before. It's usually just been sort of 3 or 5mm aluminium sheet. So I found that with the last piece I did, I need to take it out every now and again, give it a good clean out, and then a bit more cutting fluid, and then I can go and tap that next section. Getting a bit tight again. I'll just pull it out and clean out those flutes. And that's all the way through now. Just give it a few more turns just to, they are a tapered tap, so I just want to make sure that I have got all the way through with the full width section of the tap. And that's the first one threaded. I'll move on to this one, and then I can flip the piece over and do the one that goes in the side. Okay, that's those two. They were fairly straightforward because they were a straight through hole, so I could just keep threading the tap in there. When it comes to this one, it actually lines up with this hole, So when I drilled it on the drill press, I actually limited the depth of that so that I didn't punch through the thread or through this hole, potentially create some problems for myself. And now I've worked out that I can still use my tapered tap and get enough depth and enough thread on there that I can still do up the bolt fully, which is great. I was looking at going and buying a, what do they call it? A bottom, like a bottom tap, whatever they call it, where it's not tapered. So you've got your full width thread all the way to the bottom so that you can actually tap basically to the bottom of a blind hole. I find that putting that little bit of a taper on the hole once it's been drilled really helps to get the tap started. All right, so I've got the block inserted into that top tube now, and I've got just a couple of the bolts put in. Now, some of you probably noticed that I've only actually prepared or drilled and tapped 3 holes, and there's still one missing. That is because this bottom flange of the roll bar sits a little bit proud. It's only about 1 millimeter or so. So what I want to do is I want to try and tighten that down and see if it actually pulls it down flush with this top tube before I look to drill and tap this hole, because if I do it now, it's going to sit high, and then if it does squash down, it's going to then sit as in the bracket will be too low and I won't be able to thread that bolt in. So I've got my torque wrench set to 36 Newton meters, which is what I understand is correct for a 3/8 inch bolt. And I'm going to have a crack at tightening that down and see what happens. Just as I'd hoped, once it's properly torqued, it pulls that bracket down, or it might pull that tube up, I don't know, but it pulls them together. So now I can look at correctly locating this hole in the back, and I can then drill and tap that thread. Okay, so I've drilled through the side of this top tube, and I've just created enough of a starting point on the block. I'll now need to unbolt all of that again, pull the block out, take it over to the drill press and drill and tap that thread. So with that hole drilled out and thread tapped in, I've put 1, 2, 3 just to hold it in place. That's brought it in both down and in from the back just nicely. I'll jump across to the other side and tighten those off, and then I can start looking at the rear stays. So onto the rear stays. I'm not really happy with the finish of the roll bar or the rear stays in terms of the zinc coating that's been applied to them. So I will be pulling all of this apart again and getting these components powder coated, and I might just do these support braces as well just to tie it all in together. Generally, a lot of the other brackets have been fine, but these items just don't look very nice at all. So I'm just going to thread these rear bars or the rear stays on. And then see how I go. Bolting them down to the this rear section of the sill. Wow, it's not leaving me much to play with. I've basically got that thread in all the way, barely enough space for that lock nut. Not that anything can actually turn once this is all fixed off, but that's pretty much where I'm at to align the holes into this rear, the rear of the sill. I think I might just bolt that in for now, just to see how it all sits. It may need a bit more once I actually go and install the roof spider, which will need some of the internal lining trimmed out of it to sit over the roll bar. I just need to wait and see just how high that's really sitting in relation to the actual roof panel or the body panel before I fix it all off once and for all. So there's 4 bolts on top, and then there's 2 in the side. So once again, you can just see that poor quality of finish on these rear stays. So that's the rear roll bar done. It was fairly straightforward. Definitely helped having that drill press, so I'm glad that I decided to go ahead and buy that. But I thought I might throw it out to all of you as to what colour I should powder coat, I was going to say paint, but powder coat these zinc bars in the rear, in the engine bay here. I'm thinking either a silver to match the aluminium chassis or a black just for a little bit of contrast. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'm curious to see, and I'll take that on board in my final decision. Now, in the end, I didn't need to use the packers to space this out. As I sort of progressed in tightening them up, it's obviously pulled the block up and to the rear where the bolts are. So that worked out quite well. I obviously haven't fully tightened the rear stays. Again, I'll be pulling that out And I also just want to leave it because I think I might need to potentially tighten them to try and pull the bar back and down a little bit when I go to try and place the spider, the roof panel on top. So before I move on to that, I've got a couple more holes that I want to drill here. So this is just for a little bracket for the seatbelt retractor. And I have also marked out my passenger seat front mounts. So I'm going to go ahead, drill them out. And then once I've got the fronts done, I can bolt that in and then slide the seat forward and mark out the rear. I think I said in an earlier video or in a previous episode that I wanted to play around with trying to get the passenger seat right first before I went ahead and looked at the driver's seat. Just going to go drill them out and look to bolt those brackets in now. And then I'll come back and we'll have a look at what I'm planning to tackle in the next episode. So I didn't show every step of the process on camera. Basically, I had drilled the holes, climbed in underneath to bolt it in from underneath, and I ended up having to repeat that process probably about 10 times to get it to work. For some reason, well, not for some reason, I know the reason, but I was a bit baffled as to why I couldn't get the seat to slide on the adjustable seat sliders once it was bolted in, and I managed to find that underneath there was just like a bubble sitting just under this section here of fiberglass resin that was dragging on the floor pan. And I also noticed that one of the side sliders, when it was bolted to the underside of the seat, it wasn't sitting flat. So when it got screwed in, it sort of twisted it, and that was stopping it from sliding. So it's all installed now, and I'm happy to report that I have a full range of motion. Basically, I can have the seat backed up against that rear support rail or all the way hard up against this front support rail, which is exactly what I was hoping to achieve. The other thing that I completed off camera, only because it was really awkward to show, but just bolting in these seatbelt retractor brackets. So there's 2 bolts that go through. I'll show you where you have to get in to mount those bolts. These ones down the bottom I had to mount upside down because there just isn't enough clearance on top of the fuel tank that sits in the sill here. So they had to go from bottom to top. As you can see, there is no direct access at the back. I'll have to climb into the engine bay and I'll show you how to get in there. Okay, so in the engine bay now, and there's this tight little pocket in here where you can just make out there the shear plate and the nuts. It's really awkward to get to, and trying to reach around through the firewall here from one side to the other, trying to tighten those bolts. It's a bit of a nightmare, and as you can see, there was just nowhere to actually place a camera so that you could see what was happening. The other thing I did, just while Spike's sleeping in the back there, was just install, or loosely install, these bolts. So this is for the top pivot for the seat belt. Obviously the retractor down the bottom comes up to this pivot bolt, and then it's a lap sash belt that'll wrap around and buckle in the center. I put this on because my plan for the next step is to get this firewall panel installed just so that it's done. The manufacturer drilled about half the holes in the panel, but not the other half. So I want to get that sorted just so it's done and dusted. The next thing will be to do this upper firewall panel, which has the rear window in it. And that gets drilled and tapped and screwed into this top rail. And the reason I want to do that next is because when that sits up here, roughly in line with that roll bar, that'll then dictate how much I need to clearance the inside of the roof spider for the roof spider to fit, because that's what I want to get onto next. So it may not really make sense, me trying to explain it in words, but you'll see in a couple of episodes when I go to do that work, just why that's important to have that done first. So that's it for this episode. Roll bar is installed, seatbelt mounts are in place, and the passenger seat is mounted. I'm going to have to pull that seat straight back out in order to do those firewall panels for next episode, but that's okay. It's just another thing to tick off the list. It can bolt back up at any time with ease now. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Please consider hitting that like button, leave a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.